Hey, everybody. Let's start up the meeting. This is not a formal meeting. This is a workshop. In a council workshop, the council prepares for formal meetings, and we have a number of things on the agenda. One of them involves the high school, and we'll start with that first. And so just so you all in the audience understand how the workshops work, again, we entertain discussion from folks on topics, but there's no public comment, there's no back and forth unless we ask for it. We may talk amongst ourselves. So in terms of roll call, I see everyone here except Ren, who's already sent us an email that she's not feeling well, so she's excused. I see the city administrator. I believe we might have a couple of support folks online. Do we have city administrator and city planner?
Good evening, Nick Margolis, city attorney.
City attorney, you know, that other guy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Mayor, the city planner will be joining a little bit later.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so let's start up. The first item is the high school budgeting proposals. So, Aaron, are you going to introduce this? Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody. We are here again for our second year in a row. The high school students this year worked very hard. We have an amazing group of students who are ready to give you guys their presentations. First up is Jaidev, who is going to talk about the skate park. Come on up.
Testing. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So to introduce myself, my name is Jaidev Galvin. It's nice to meet you all from the City Council Board. And I'm presenting an idea to fix up the skate park. So can you go to the next slide, please? All right. So my objective is to fix up the skate park. It's in the title, right? And so I feel like going about this, let me just, for starters, why should we fix it up, right? Who's gonna go to the skate park? Some lousy kids, I don't know, some outcasts or whatever. Like, I believe the skate park, it's home for people who have nowhere else to go, who have just free time and time to kill. It's for fun, you know? Kids who go to the skate park ride bikes or skate, BMX or whatever. It's their form of like their freedom, you know? And I feel like people should care for that because they care for themselves. That's the only way of letting them express themselves. And so, can you go to the next slide, please? The next steps for taking care of the skate park, I believe, is for fixing up the concrete because you can't build up if you have no foundation. And so essentially, what the skate park is hurting in, the concrete, there's a lot of cracks, and it's not really fun to ride. And there's a lot of unused space. So if the concrete was stable and it was smooth and it was brand new, it would invoke more people to just go out and have fun, talk to new people that they may have not met before, you know? And so that's pretty much it. Other than that, there are a few pieces in the skate park. It feels like someone's backyard. Like, it's not really organized. It's just put together. I mean, I wouldn't say it's asking for much, but it's an investment in our community, showing kids it's okay to go outside, and we have this beautiful memorial park. We have these football fields, these baseball fields, and I want people to be able to say, hey, our skate park, man, in Beacon, we got a fresh little city, you know? People, it's like a tourist attraction. People come from New York City and from all over the world to come to our little town. And for people to see that we have some things that are like, how do I put this? Like monuments. Like showing that we care for our kids and our youth, it shows a lot to the people of outside of Beacon. Can you go to the next slide, please? And so the reason being why the skate park is limiting, so essentially, have you guys ever been to the skate park yourselves? Have you like seen it? Mm-hmm. All right. So if you have seen it, you can see that there's ramps on either side, and that's it. You're just going back and forth, back and forth. It's like a seesaw, you know? And with the example that I've shown below, you can see how the pieces that they're arranged, you can go in like a circular motion. You could go from this corner to this corner, this corner, and that corner. So I would believe it's more free-flowing, and it allows for whoever uses the skate park to have the freedom of just doing any type of tricks or just trying whatever they want. And with the current setup that it's in, it's just very limiting. That's my take on it. Can you go to the next slide, please? And here are some more examples of how a skate park can be more free-flowing and just fun, to be honest. It's like, not to be repetitive, but it's limiting. It's just back and forth, back and forth. And like I said, all the cracks in the concrete, there's a lot of unused space, and I feel like that's being taken for granted. So, next slide. Oh, well, that's it for my next presentee.
So Vanessa also has a presentation about the skate park, and then the two of them together figured that they would maybe answer any questions that you guys had, because they're common.
Hi, so my name is Vanessa Murphy, and my focus for the presentation, as she said, was to talk about some of the safety issues within the skate park and what I believe would improve the quality of the space. Next slide, please. So the majority of common injuries sustained by skaters are due to surface irregularities and collisions with motor vehicles or pedestrians. Skate parks are meant to provide a safe environment for skateboarding. They serve as a gathering space for the youth and help to provide a healthy community activity. Next slide, please. However, because, as what Jaidev was saying, there are large cracks all along the concrete flooring, the Beacon Skate Park is a hazardous environment for skaters. Next slide, please. So as a starting point, my proposal is to fill in the cracks in order to avoid injury or further injury. Next slide, please. And along with this, there are holes, loose pieces, and rotting wood that I believe could be repaired within the budget. Next slide, please. These are the materials that I've gathered from research and for the cracks, and their estimated total. This price point does allow for many other possible costs and could hopefully allow for some repairs to be done on the wood equipment. Next slide, please. So, as both Jaidev and I are saying, it's very evident that the skate park has issues that need to be addressed. The Beacon Skate Park should foster a sense of community and provide a safe space for skaters of all skill levels. I do hope that in your consideration, you take into consideration that both Jaidev and I identify these issues, and you see them as like necessary and safe for improving the function and quality of the space. So, thank you. And
So are you besides repairing the concrete flooring, are you asking also for additional equipment and ramps to be built?
Well, if that's within the budget, it would be sure helpful.
Do you speak into the mic? That way the recording will hear you.
It would sure be helpful, and it would shock many people who are regulars, and it would inspire more of their friends to come and check out the new equipment that they have.
And from my understanding, the existence of the skate park is due to volunteers that had previously put it all together, and I guess they have been maintaining it over the years, or do they play an active role, those volunteers?
they do. I have heard like that they repair it every 2 years or so, but it seems like there's like issues that are constantly popping up with it, which do need to be addressed because it turns into a safety hazard for the people that are using it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Is that all the questions?
I have one. Is the surface concrete or is it asphalt? Is it like a road or is it like a sidewalk?
I believe it's more as like concrete, like a sidewalk, not
It is.
asphalt.
Okay.
Mhm.
This is more a comment that I appreciated that you're both, your presentations both pointed out the sort of physical things that you're proposing be fixed, and also pointing out that this is a space for community and for gathering. So that's really helpful feedback to know how the park is being used and sort of what use you see that it has.
Okay.
I got one more.
Oh, go for
Is
it.
there a park in the area that you're aware of that you would view as a model? Like, is there one that you've used somewhere else nearby that you'd say, yeah, they're doing it right?
I believe this is our only community outlet for skaters and others alike.
Okay.
I don't know any myself.
Okay.
I can't speak to.
I just want to say that I also really appreciate the contextualization of how important it is to fill in these cracks because of the role that a skate park plays in the safety of skaters. And I appreciate the angle of we need to fix this, but also like let's look at this space as a whole and figure out what can we do to redesign it, make it better, make it more suitable. And I hope as we look at this and we address it that you continue to put your input into this. And I want to thank you both for your presentations.
Yeah.
Sorry, one more question. The quote of 1550 that you had on the screen, was that for the repair of the ramps only, or also for patching the
For
pavement?
my presentation?
Mhm.
That was for the cracks. That was just for the cracks.
That was for the cracks. Got it. So the material costs for repairing the ramps themselves was not included in that?
No, so I believe that it's mostly important to fix the cracks because that is like a huge safety issue.
Mhm.
I think that the additional costs would have to come afterwards. But I mean, we both mentioned it in like coincidentally in our presentations that like these cracks are a huge safety issue
Mhm.
and like just deter people from even going to the park. So I think that's why it's like very important to actually address that first.
Okay. Thank you.
Shaidev, do you think that it's possible to make the park more free-flowing by just rearranging the existing ramps and whatnot that we have there now? Or do you think it's we would need to invest in more or build new?
I do believe it's a mix of both because, like I said in my presentation, the concrete is a foundation, and the reason why the pieces are the way they are now is because it's like it's avoiding the problem. You know, if we fix the cracks, then it would be able to rearrange the pieces in a more comfortable manner.
Everybody good? Okay, thank you very much. Let's get the
Thank you.
next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, what's up next?
Isabella.
It is Isabella. Right, so Isabella is here to present her idea about the blue lights.
Hi, my name is Isabella. So my idea for the
Speaking to the mic.
Hi, my name is Isabella, and my idea for the participatory budget project was emergency blue light phones. I'm sure that name might ring a bell with you, as they have recently been installed in many colleges as a form of safety for students or just the general public. Next slide, please. So it's a nice way to keep beacons safe and doesn't need to be everywhere. Start off with one. And it would help the residents feel more comfortable and safe in their everyday life, knowing that it's becoming more populated with people finding Beacon being an attraction. Next slide, please. So what emergency blue light phones are, they're a pole-light structure that tends to be towards 9 feet tall, and they can include a solar panel if need be. And when the button is pressed, a blue light will flash and it will alert emergency services, which can be customized to being a police station, fire station, or just 911, and then they can assess from there. And it is illuminated at night, which helps it be easy to see and access if in an emergency. Next, please. Okay. So at this time, I'm sure you know we do not have one of these. And not that Beacon is a very unsafe place. There are places where it would make people more comfortable for it to be. Places like this would be in parking lots, parks, trails, where there is not many outlets to find safety or help in an emergency. Next slide, please. So, 2 locations that came off the top of my head were the Riverfront Trail and Dennings Point Trail, where they meet. So my mother and my sister, they go on walks there with the dogs early in the morning, and it can be very, seem like not sketchy, just like can be unnerving for some. And it is a secluded place, which is away from any type of city, like it's not on Main Street where there's many buildings or places that you can go to, outlets for help. And same thing with Memorial Park. Again, it doesn't have to be in these exact places, but more secluded areas or places that would need a more, like an outlet to find help in an emergency. So those were 2 places that I just thought of off the top of my head. Of course, wherever you think need be would be a great place as well. Next slide, please. So I included 3 information links of places that do sell them. And on those websites, you can find quotes. So there's different things you can add, like solar panels, security cameras, and you can go in collaboration with like Verizon, AT&T to like up the network of it for if you wanted to install a phone rather than just a button. It can also be a small panel that's installed on the side of a building. They do many variations of this product. And yeah. And it is within the price range. Between $5,000 and $10,000 is the about, depending on how many add-ons you choose. And that is it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from up here?
I have a question, 2 questions actually. First is, did you happen to research whether these machines need to be, I assume they need to be connected to electric, and whether they have to be connected to phone or internet?
So the phone or internet, that's only if you choose the add-on of a phone, so that they would need to pull off and call if they wanted the help. The button, however, does not need Verizon, like all those kinds of services.
Okay.
The solar panel would be a nice alternative option.
Okay. And did you happen to give any thought to any other locations, or just those 2 that you suggested?
There could be some on more secluded neighborhoods of Beacon that aren't near the exact, like the police station's right here, so like neighborhoods near here wouldn't be a prime spot for that because it's not quite necessary.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the question I had before your presentation was why those particular locations, and I really appreciate you giving voice to your own experiences in there and why you felt those were good ones, and the idea that there aren't other places nearby like there are on Main Street where you could go if you're feeling unsafe for any reason. I'm curious if you, in your research, did you look at other communities that have this and their experience with them, and anything you can share from that if you did?
Sorry. They tend to be very positive in that the residents within the area do feel more safe, and they do help get first responders on site faster than, like, if they didn't have a phone on them, then they'd have to go find and seek help, or if it's an emergency where, like, a person's injured and they can't go far, and that's right there. There's more convenience to it, and they've found convenience to it, and within college communities, it's very safer, and it makes the people within feel safe.
Great, thank you.
Anything else?
I'm curious I guess first a comment, I appreciate that it seems like there's sort of 2 effects of sort of machines like this. One is it can help people feel safer to know that there's an option, and the other is that it literally is helpful for folks who actually need it. And I was curious if you had considered the location. I know it sounded like the location by Dennings Point was helpful because what I heard you say is that it can feel a little more isolated in that location. Yeah. And I'm trying to think of instances where people might not have a phone on them, or might be, if not disoriented, like maybe feeling a little more isolated. I'm wondering what you would think of one at the trailhead of Mount Beacon, it's just like opposite end of town, or other sort of pockets of Beacon that you've identified or experienced as feeling a little more isolated.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's right at the the point of the trail on Mount Beacon. I think that's another great spot for it to be because it also isn't near a whole lot of population within Beacon. It's kind of secluded off to the side.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Who's up next?
Right. And this is Ella, who is going to discuss pollinator gardens.
Hi there, I'm Ella, and my idea was to put a
So
pollinator
speak into the mic.
Oop.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Ella, and my idea was to put in another pollinator garden. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the idea for the pollinator garden, the goal, and then some examples of established gardens in the area because we have a few. Next slide, please. So my idea is the installation of a new pollinator garden near the city rec center. The garden would be open to all members of the community and would act as an educational resource for Beacon youth, specifically the kids who go to the rec center. Because currently we have pollinator gardens at the elementary schools, but I had a meeting with Holly O'Grady, who runs them, and the issue is that there's just like a disconnect because it's only available to the kids at the elementary schools and they can't be accessed all the time. So by putting it in a public space like the rec center, it could be used by kids from all over Beacon and not just elementary school kids either, like it could be high school kids or middle school kids, or be utilized by Green Teen as well. Next slide, please. So this is a little mock-up of my proposal. I think a 10 by 8 foot garden would be ideal, but you know the measurements can be changed. Next slide, please. So the goal of a pollinator garden is to provide a green space that not only provides environmental benefits for fostering healthy natural processes and protection of native pollinators, but it also provides a space for people to learn about the natural world and take part in protecting it. So as a town, I think we are very environmentally conscious and do work on preserving green spaces, and I think it'd be a cool resource to have and an important way of doing our part in protecting the environment. Next slide, please. So I included 2 photos of established gardens, the one at Glenham Elementary School and the one at Forrestal Elementary School. So I think that putting it at the rec center would be helpful because there already is an established garden there through Green Teen, so there'd be access to hoses for watering it. Because an issue would be if we were to put it in parks or something, it makes it complicated getting water to it. But as you can see, the gardens at Forrestal and Glenham have done very well and have been a cool learning tool for teachers and kids because I think it's important to start teaching kids at a young age to get interested and take part in their community and focus on helping out the environment. Next slide, please. So that's my presentation. I have a list of required materials and an estimated cost I'll read out before I answer questions. So the garden would need compost and mulch. And then for fencing material, I think it could be interesting to use just natural sticks, which wouldn't be a cost, it would be just found. And then by enclosing it with chicken wire to prevent deer and other animals from eating the flowers. And then I think just collecting stones to create a border around the garden bed so there could be a little path. And there'd need to be seeds for 3 to 4 native flowering plants. I have yet to determine the exact plants. And then just hinges for a gate. And planting would occur around May. That would be when I would put the seeds in the ground. But the garden can be built in April and plans can be made prior to then. And the estimated total cost with generous wiggle room would be about $2,000. But yeah, so I'll open up to questions now.
I appreciate your thoughtfulness as to location-wise, specifically access to water. And I am curious about, you did mention that the Green Teen does do gardening at the rec center at West Center Street, and I feel like I've seen that before. So I'm curious as to how the pollinator garden would differ or collaborate or share that space.
So Green Teen, I don't do Green Teen, but I know they grow primarily root vegetables and things like that, so less of a flowering plant. So by adding a pollinator garden, that gives access for these pollinators like butterflies, bees, hummingbirds to come in and have somewhere to feed, which those are pretty important species in our ecosystem. So it would be less of like a food kind of thing and more of a like environmental thing.
And do you have thoughts as to like where around the rec center this would be?
Yeah, so I wanted to like come here and pitch it first before I like, you know, got too deep into trying to like mark out spots at the rec center, but I've been there before and they have like the little gazebo, so I think it could be somewhere near there just because I don't want to take up like room for where they use like the rec center for the kids. So I kind of, there's a few like possible spots, but to be determined.
Have you thought at all about the ongoing management of this garden? Are you thinking it would be Green Teens or students from the high school?
So at the high school, we do have a gardening club. So I think it could be interesting to maybe like see about in the future having them come out and do it, as well as, you know, Green Teen is too. I'm, you know, going away to college next year. So I wouldn't be able to water it, but I know like as a community, I think that there is interest in gardening. Like I know that there's like a gardening club that my mom wants to join. So like I think that there's people around the community, and if it's in a public space like the rec center and not at a school, I think that that makes it more like open and inviting to people who like aren't a part of the school to come and water it. But I think it could be cool to do it through the high school or through the rec center and Green Teen.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate, as Justice said, your thoughtfulness and, you know, learning what the materials are and what site makes sense for ongoing maintenance. I was curious if you would consider, especially if the high school gardening club became involved, locating it not at the school but closer to the school, potentially at Memorial Park is just one of the sites that I was thinking that might be a little more convenient for a school club to help maintain.
Yeah, so my original thought was to put it at Memorial Park, but the issue with that is like the water there pools really weird because of the big hill. So like runoff goes down the hill and pools kind of down at the bottom there. And there isn't like nice access to like a hose. So it would make it a little bit more difficult to like locate it there. Plus the proximity to like the sports fields was a concern of mine. And I also do worry about like vandalism and stuff, like being in such an open area that isn't being used by like the rec center and things like that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
We have one more, and that would be Mia, who has a presentation about availability of contraceptives.
Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Mia Nelson Chain, and for my City of Beacon Participatory Budget Plan, I wanted to talk about making contraceptives accessible to the community. Next slide, please. So for my mission statement, I am a co-president of Students for Gender Equality at the high school, and recently we've been working with getting contraceptives available in the nurse's office. So we attended a board meeting, and we were at the City of Beacon Day where we had set up a stand and got a whole bunch of signatures for people in the community that were interested in having these more accessible to people. One of the reasons why I think that this is really important to have in the community is just because of how many young people are in Beacon, New York, and the amount of the growth of STIs that have been happening since about 2020. You can see in the next slide, I put a bunch of statistics happening of the growth of the more common STIs that happen. Yeah, next slide, please. This is the petition that we put together at Students for Gender Equality of the health statistics that we thought were important and relevant to our community. So obviously contraceptives should be available to people not only for sexual health reasons, but because of pregnancy reasons, and just making sure that everybody should be open and honest about their sexual health. It shouldn't be something we should be taboo about, especially in 2023 going into 2024. So I believe this is something that we should be working towards and making safer. So in the next slide, my idea, as I'm going into college. I've been doing a lot of visits to college campuses, and one thing that they all have in common is that these small towns, they all have accesses to contraceptives. Obviously, the dorms will have them and such, but also in the areas that aren't necessarily on campus, they have things such as, which are contraceptive vending machines, where they have all these different kinds laid out where they're just labeled and kind of more discreet, and they're all free, which is a big part of this, because just having the access to something like that, especially I know for teenagers, like, as much as it is something that like we would like to all be very open and honest with our parents about, it's not always something that you can be. But having people have the opportunity to have access to these things for free would just, I feel, help people in a way that the community can work together on. So I know in this specific vending machine, on the top there is some Plan B that is accessible that is not free. That one costs $15, and then there are dental dams, condoms of all different varieties. And yeah, so I've seen this at Tufts University, and I've also done some research at BU and a lot of colleges in the area such as Vassar. I know that New Paltz has something also like this. And so my idea was, as far as where to put something like this, would either be the rec center. I know that the Beacon Wellness Pharmacy, because they're a freestanding pharmacy, it might be easier to put something like this at rather than Rite Aid, or at the health clinics. I know we have Sunriver Health Clinic, and there has been one that has been working on getting open, and like the Key Food Plaza, but I'm not really sure what's happening with that. But yeah, thank you. I think that's it.
Okay, questions?
I imagine that with something like this, because it's a vending machine, there would be like ongoing costs and regular, I don't know if maintenance is the correct term, but you know, keeping up with making sure that it's refilled and whatnot. And I'm curious as to who would be responsible for that, especially like given a specific location.
Well, I know at the Students for Gender Equality Club, I mean, we have a lot of members that are really adamant about this and are really passionate about it, so I think it could be something that we could work towards. I know that refilling the vending machine, you can get packs of condoms and all the contraceptives that you need, about 2,000 in a pack for about $140, which is something that a bake sale at Students for Gender Equality Club can take care of in 1 month. So that can just be an ongoing thing at the high school, or just community members and donations were something that I was initially interested in.
Are you aware of any other communities that do offer them outside of schools? Anything locally that you've heard of, you read about as you're doing research for this?
Not that I can think of, no.
And is there currently one in the high school? Did you say so?
No, there is not one in the high school. We're working on getting condoms accessible in the nurse's office just to have, but there is not something like this available in the high school.
And you referred to a petition that people signed, and that was in support of it at the high school or in general?
At Spirit of Beacon Day, we collected about 120 signatures from community members that were all interested
in having it in the community, not in the school.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great that you did that. You did that outreach to kind of to garner the interest in the community. I really appreciated hearing about that.
Did you get any pushback?
Not at all. No. Everyone seemed to be very open and honest about it. I mean, if you're walking up to the Students for Gender Equality booth, I doubt that you're going to go in there and be kind of against it.
Although there would be people possibly that might do that.
Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
I appreciated all of the research and stats and data that you included in your presentation, including data specific to Dutchess County, as well as nationwide trends. That was really impactful. And I think this is a great idea, and my question is just the same as Justice's about how we ensure that long-term ongoing maintenance is something that we can commit to if there's an initial investment in it.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great idea.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned the price of the condoms. Were there any other things you think are part of this program that you had a chance to look at the costs of that we should be aware of?
Although like a vending machine is just one idea, there are other ways that we can make them accessible just by having a cart or something that could be less costly. A vending machine I saw online is about $1,400 to $2,000. But again, I feel like a cart or just having bins, shelves, anything like that would just be just as effective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, council, do we want to consider these and talk about them at the next workshop, or do we want to do anything now? I think we've got a fairly lengthy agenda. My preference would be to kind of cover the agenda first and see what's left.
Yeah, whether today or next one, I was just curious about what our next steps are. I know like last year we had to have various department heads or experts review these, so I don't know if it's worth, while we have the students here, just talk about what our next steps might be.
We already have it in the budget. We don't have to make a decision about how we use that budget before we approve the budget, right? We can just have the money in there for participatory.
Yeah, no, it's
budgeting.
already in there
this
for
year's
participatory.
Yes, so the funding that we're looking
Oh, this is for the 2023.
to allocate
yeah,
here
so
is
it's already there.
2023.
Yeah.
I know I'd like to talk to Mark Price about the park component of
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
You kind of have three that fall into that, the pollinator garden and the two skate park presentations.
Yeah, and with the condom one, I didn't know if the Department of Health had to get involved or how that, I have no idea if there's any limitations on that as a municipality or not, so.
So that's the one that I'm having the hardest time figuring out how we implement, because, I mean, we could put a vending machine anywhere, right? But if nobody's using it, we're not doing any good. So I'm trying to figure out, like, what's the safest place, discreet place that people can go? It seems to be, what was the recommendation? Was the Sun River Health seemed like a good option, but that is private. That's not, we don't have a say in that.
Yeah, the public option was at the rec center.
Yeah, but I don't know.
You don't think that's discreet enough?
I guess I don't know the audience, so I don't know if it's, for people who are already at the rec center and might as well grab a couple condoms while I'm here, or do people go to the rec center to go pick up some condoms and go? So I'm trying to figure out how that actually works.
So we can vet this further and try to get you some memos in about a week, and then you'll have some additional information for the 18th when we have our combined workshop and voting meeting.
All right. And you're welcome to come back to that meeting if you want to, or you can always listen online if that works better for you. So thank you.
I just want to say that, although I'm not surprised, I'm thoroughly impressed by all the presentations made tonight. Your ability to speak in public is very impressive, and I'm proud of you all, and thank you for coming to us.
Yeah, I would just add, so in terms of our next step, we're going to do a little bit of data collection and come back at the next workshop and see what we've got, and when we do some comparisons. I appreciate the city administrator for doing that. And then just to reiterate what George said, I think our objective here in allocating some funds was to, get you all some experience thinking about, our community, what's needed in our community, and then how you would advocate for it. And I was just very pleased, and I think we all were, so thank you. All right. Okay.
You're welcome to stick around or not. If you want to all exit now, we can pause.
You can stay for the Fishkill Ad Hoc Committee.
All right. Let's give them a minute.
Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Thank you.
You mean they're not going to stay for the whole meeting?
No. Well, in some ways, actually, the potential future of Camp Beacon would impact the high school, but that is several years down the line, so.
Okay. So next one is just to talk about the ad hoc committee. I did a couple of minor, mostly corrections to the memo and, distributed it. We posted it online. We have turned a application into a fillable form, and we've gotten, looks like about 10 applications so far.
Yep.
So, but if we want to discuss, this is the time. What do y'all think?
One of my questions, and this is maybe even a question for JC, who I saw.
Yeah, he's in
And
the
John,
back.
He's like
John Clark
exactly-
is on the meeting, Mayor.
You're
just-
exactly
good.
behind the podium in my line of sight. How, I know this is actually a fairly significantly sized committee of 9 to 11 members, and also a lot of the feedback I've been hearing from the community is sort of twofold. One is how exactly you envision this aspect of community input looking like. The phrase I keep hearing is comprehensive plan-like engagement. I recognize that would be a massively heavy lift, but I think there are still like some smart strategies that could be used for soliciting community feedback outside of the main membership. And then the second question is maybe a little bit more for the mayor, is about sort of how we're resourcing the committee. I understand the city planner will be a part of it, but what other experts might be brought in to support the committee and also help continue to educate the public?
Okay.
So I guess those are two separate questions, but.
Well, I can tell you my view. JC, you'd be welcome to join us here, and then we've got John as well. So I wrote the memo, collected input from it, and kind of revised a little bit. My thinking on input is that we clearly need a piece. I want to leave enough to the committee to sort for themselves, but I imagine that it would be certainly, some sort of public event where people could come speak, could see examples of what people have in mind and comment on it. Exactly how they would organize that, I would leave to them. I would prefer there to be a process where people come and speak. I think there's a lot of value to that. It doesn't have to be the only approach, but I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. I don't know, any thoughts that John or JC you might add to that about how the community input would work?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So I was glad I knew about this discussion tonight, and so my attitude is.
JC, would you mind just introducing yourself for those who might not know
sure.
you and listening?
Thank you, Molly. So J.C. Calderon, resident in Beacon and local architect, planning board ex-member, Main Street Access Committee ex-member. So I think my goal is to initially have more of a listening campaign on my part, at least, a better understanding of the history, the review of the comprehensive plan, the one that was updated in 2017, I believe, and just a better deep dive into some of the existing conditions, and then. But in terms of how to get the public, I would like to figure that out with the help of the council of what forum and what how we could have a opportunity for people to come and speak, where and when and how. So that's the kind of, I think my approach would be to provide some input on a refresher of the past accomplishments and decisions, and the current sort of what brought us to here, and then have people weigh in on their personal opinions. But but moving further along, I think it would be good to share with the public some precedents in other towns in Westchester or New York City on how they have dealt with similar issues, zoning, street life, etc. So I plan to investigate that a little with the help of the committee, and sort of learn from other communities' efforts to do similar things, so that we don't try to reinvent a wheel that's already been invented. So we're going to that's sort of how I see the opportunity here. So,
John, would you add anything? If you're there.
Generally, the way these committee processes work with the public hearings are to have 2 public workshops, at least one sort of midway or towards the early section of the process, and one after you have some draft recommendations ready. So I always find it useful for the committee to work for a while, do the basic surveil of the site, get familiar with the site, maybe put together some draft maps of the site, some features that are important to consider, and then come up with a few options to consider, and then bring it to the public for that sort of first listening workshop, because it's more effective if the public can focus on some ideas and see some options and some background maps, rather than having it up front so far that all you get is sort of random ideas thrown out there. That's my opinion. And then the committee can do some work, refine the options, and come back with some recommendations, and then have a second public workshop. Those are sort of the minimum way you usually deal with a discrete project like this. And then once the committee comes up with their recommendations after the public hearing or the public workshops, they refer draft report or draft zoning or whatever the outcome is to the city council, and they have their say, some comments, and then eventually come up with a draft that can go to a public hearing.
Okay. Then in terms of resources, which was the other question, certainly we're going to commit city planner resource, and then other kind of city resource to the extent that we have it. We have, an engineer. I left some room for, if the planner or whoever's assigned recommends additional specific expertise is needed. And again, in my head, and you may have a view on this, John, is, there might be a reason for traffic, there might be a reason for, alternative to cars, in terms of thinking, but I just wasn't sure what expertise might be relevant. Any thoughts on that, John?
Well, those are the 2 issues that might come up that I think the city planner should be able to deal with, are transportation and view issues. There's a section of the code that was put in to designate scenic views, but it was never implemented. There was no views. The council never followed up on that, and so that might be something that the city planner or somebody with some local expertise could take on, trying to come up with where are the best scenic views along that corridor. I know there are some. And then, the whole transportation mix. There's a lot of new mobilities out there, different options that can be considered. And generally speaking, I don't think you need a transportation engineer, but the city engineer might be helpful for certain questions. And if it comes down to the fact that you really need a transportation engineer, there's the planning board has one on retainer, so that could be an option.
Okay, thank you.
Would these meetings be open to the public to attend, although not necessarily participate?
That was my other question as well.
Yeah, I'd like them to be public. I was going to ask the same question. I think people deserve to hear the conversation.
Yeah, so it would determine the location of these meetings to accommodate possibly larger crowds or
Right.
more than 11 people.
I certainly have no issue kind of broadcasting them. We might have to figure out how to schedule meetings, but that seems to be fine.
When you say broadcast, do you mean video as well, like Peter? Yeah, okay.
Right, same way we do planning board or zoning.
We don't have any budget for Pete to do that, so.
Yeah, that would have to be included in this then. Right. right?
Yeah, that was my question. And we talked about resources. Are we thinking we could have budget for it? And if so, maybe this is a conversation before we could park for a moment until we talk specifically about our budget. But would there be things, knowing this is coming up now and this is the route we want to take, which we didn't know when you first presented your budget, do we want to take a look at our budget with that in mind and see how much we could put towards this?
Mm-hmm. And there might be, less expensive ways, like just using our Zoom account for the public element or a few other things, right?
Yeah, our different committees have sort of a range of accessibilities and cost. I think my baseline ask would that it be open to the public and the location and time be made public, and that the city Zoom account be made available so folks can join that way. I'm open to other ideas about if we want to have the full expense of Pete recording and putting them out the way that we do for our meetings.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm probably speaking out of turn here, but maybe if we are not having public input at every meeting, really you just need to broadcast on YouTube. We don't need to have people calling in on Zoom, right? So maybe that saves money.
Okay. Yeah, well, we can do that. I mean, I think that it's a deliberative body that's going to require input, so it certainly have no reason that it shouldn't be public. But I think that it's not going to be the kind of give and take that we see here. And so it might work with some kind of lesser approaches, right? And we can kind of
except
sort
for the
that.
sessions where there is public
Exactly,
input.
right? Yeah. Other thoughts, comments? Scope okay? Everything else all right?
Yeah, if you could say a little bit more about what you're looking for in terms of who you select for this committee, I think that might be useful for those who are interested in applying.
Yeah, so let me start most specific, although that's probably, let me start there. So obviously it affects people around Route 52 and the environs. So I want it to include both residents and commercial in that area. So for instance, a business owner on 52 or a resident directly adjacent to the site. So that's sort of one group kind of directly affected. The second one is sort of kind of broader community input. So just looking to make sure that it's representative of the community. I'm sure there will be plenty of people who have very specific interests, but I think it's also important to engage the entire community. So looking for a little bit for representation in the community. And then kind of the third one is looking for some expertise. So it's not quite like the planning board or zoning board where you kind of want some expertise. On the other hand, it helps, right? And so one of the reasons to ask JC to volunteer his time is that, he has both experience on some of our committees and that kind of expertise. And I think it's important for the process. So some combination of those three, right? Directly affected close by, community broadly, representative, and then some expertise.
Yeah, one specific thing I've heard to your second bucket is to hopefully get people who either are currently renters or who have experience doing that, particularly who identify as low income, if that's or affordable, or have used affordable housing, as that seems to be one of kind of the tenets of our thing, is someone who might have some more direct experience in that, or barring that, at least has expertise in that area. I think that could be really helpful as we kind of narrow in on what is possible in that area.
Okay.
And Lee, when do you want these applications all in by? Like when do you plan on making the decisions?
I think we said December 15th.
Okay.
Because I thought, we make selections before end of year, then when we reorganize, we get ourselves a new planner. So probably a January start. It wouldn't surprise me if it takes us a little longer because we were also in the process of finding a new planner. But something like that. So like not too long after the start of the year, we can get going. So like I said, what we put on the website, I think, was December 15th.
Okay.
So.
Just in the spirit of documenting this meeting, we just talked about having public deliberation. Could we include that in the document under a heading transparency? Or maybe just morph it with the community input section, just so we have it for posterity?
Yeah, let me take the community input one and kind of try to be more specific. I wanted to leave them some room to, some room to maneuver, But I think that we can be more specific and still leave them room to maneuver, right?
And just to put in, you know, that the meetings will be public.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Not necessarily recorded, but public.
Yep,
And
no problem.
Noticed and public.
Of course.
Noticed has a
So I
definition.
maybe not officially noticed, but I
Okay.
know sometimes.
We'll put them on the calendar.
Yeah, committee meetings get scheduled last minute, and it's like, oh, it's tomorrow. But if we could try and be a little more, to whatever extent is feasible, give people, the public, advance notice so they know that a meeting's happening.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the right approach, right? I think noticing is a legal term, and I think it's more posting or whatever, and directing people to our website for details on times and stuff like that. Okay.
And I also heard the recommendation, and maybe this is getting too in the weeds, but a recommendation from John to have at least 2 public workshops. And maybe that's something we should consider budgetarily, if we think those are ones that should be broadcast or more resource than all of the meetings.
Okay, so I will edit the community input section in those areas, but I will write it in a way to leave them room, right? Because I want them to also feel, you know, empowered to make their choices. I think they'll hear it from us. The other one I wrote in there was that we would early on ask them to come here as well, so we'll have another opportunity to engage them. And I'm pretty sure they will listen to what we suggest in this area, right? So again, I will write it, but I will leave some wiggle room, okay?
Sure.
I have to say I really appreciate the thoughtfulness you've put behind this approach, Lee. I think hopefully everyone who's interested in this area feels like there's an opportunity for them to get involved in some level. So, because it is, you know, an important part of our future of the city. So.
Yeah, it actually took me some while to write it. Process-wise, I got the crib from the last one. But in terms of topics and scope, and I think the scope's important, that it's not just this one street, that we're trying to think about how it fits, how you get to it, how you move from there possibly over to Matawan in terms of that access, just how the pieces fit together. And I just want to make sure they do that. They might come back and say, I need more time in addition to more resource, but I'm going to ask that they try to stay kind of more limited. They don't have to solve all of the world's problems and every part of it. I think some good concept ideas, you know, may not have a single one, maybe 2 or 3 versions, and then what's connected to that in terms of what does that mean in terms of design standards, what does it mean in terms of other things we might want to have as next steps. And I'll ask them, you know, for their thinking on that. I think if we've got someone as good as John Clark in the new year, they should be in good standing. So.
I think the one question that's still outstanding, did you have something, JC?
Thanks, Dan. Just to reiterate, for the record, you know, again, I appreciate the opportunity to help the city, and I appreciate the invitation from the mayor. But just to be clear and to reiterate to the public that, you know, please consider submitting an application if this is something you're interested in. I've been a licensed architect for over 25 years, but I don't approach this. I'm trying to not. My goal is to approach this without any kind of preconceived ideas about what the solutions are. The idea, I think, is to welcome input from the community, and so that, to the extent possible, there can be a benefit, and the community will support the ultimate recommendations to the largest extent possible. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. And I also want to say I appreciate, JC, you're willing to step up to do this, and I know it's a fair commitment, and I'm very appreciative.
So the one thing that I wanted to raise is what happens in the next 6 to 9 months with Fishkill Avenue zoning while this committee deliberates. And I'm still of the opinion that after hearing from a lot of people that they want to have smaller dimension buildings, that they want to have affordable housing, that they want to have cycling lanes, and we don't have any of those things in our current zoning, that perhaps we put in place a moratorium contingent on the committee's completion of their work. Are there any other council members that are interested in exploring a moratorium while this committee deliberates?
Yeah, I'm interested in considering that. Since there's a sort of concrete sort of timeline and objective set out, my understanding is that that would be allowable.
So I will take an opposite view. I'll be interested in what John has to say, or also the city attorney. I think the city attorney will say, I think we've got room, but I don't know. I'd like to hear those two views first, actually.
I would not recommend a moratorium at this time. You know, I'm not a lawyer. You can talk to the city attorney about this, but as I understand moratoriums, and I've dealt with a few along the way, there's no enabling state provision for moratorium. It's basically on case law, and case laws is built up over a long period of time. There's been a lot of legal actions over moratoria. And the basics of it, as I understand it, is you have to have a valid public purpose. And the courts generally have gone along with moratorium if there's some sort of emergency situation. You know, your sewer plant malfunctions, or the main, you know, it's going to take 6 months to fix. Or if you're sort of in a imminent adoption of a zoning law that would change the provisions so that people don't put in applications at the last minute to try to beat the deadline of the zoning law adoption. How long that reasonable time frame is that is accepted by the court is.
And I can address that, John.
Yeah, generally speaking, usually you have to have a time certain, and the courts have looked more favorably on shorter moratoria than longer ones. And what I would say about this process is you're talking first 6 to 9 months for the planning process. These things generally spill longer than you expect. The Main Street Committee took 2 years to come up with their recommendations. So you can get bogged down in public workshops and back and forth. So there's no guarantee that you can stick to that 6 to 9 month time frame. And then secondly, that's only for the recommendations. Then you have to go through the process of adopting a zoning provision, which can take another 6 months or another period of time. So that's sort of a long, there's no date certain here what we're talking about. And so I would suggest that you let the process play out. And when you get to the point where you can see a date certain for the adoption of a zoning law, then you consider whether a moratorium is required. That would be my suggestion. Also, it is relatively, I mean, the moratorium is very restrictive on property owners in that area. You can make exceptions, but you know, right now before the planning board, there's an application for that area for a place of worship to take over one of the Healy buildings. That could be stopped in its track. That might be a good thing. And it's something that I'm not sure people would want to stop a place of worship taking over an existing building and making the site plan a lot better than it is right now. And that could get stalled because of a moratorium. So I think there's things that can be considered, and I would not jump into a moratorium until you have a much firmer idea of how long this is going to take.
So, John, I appreciate the planning perspective. From a legal perspective, the council has authority generally to issue moratoriums. So moratoriums are a suspension of your zoning code, and that can be broadly across the city or for specific districts or for specific matters. Moratoriums are generally frowned upon because they are restrictive of property rights. And as John indicated, there's been a lot of litigation over it, a lot of good case law where courts evaluate moratoriums to find it they're validly enacted. Sometimes moratoriums are enacted for invalid purposes to stop a particular project based upon impermissible reasons, or prematurely when there's not been a sufficient basis set forth for the topic that is being studied. Courts also look at the length of the moratoriums, generally recognizing that at a certain point, the moratorium is impermissible because it's exceeded a reasonable period of time. 6 to 9 months is the standard time. When it gets to beyond that, courts then start frowning upon it. But courts generally look at the purpose behind it. And to tag on what John has said, the purpose is key because purpose of the moratorium is to sort of preserve the status quo while you're examining changes to the law. But if you don't have those changes fully in mind or vetted out, courts will look at that and question why, what is the need, what is the concern. And I don't think there's enough that I've heard that justifies that at this point. And I'm not so sure how we define the purpose, especially when one of the reasons you formed this committee is to actually look at what are the potential areas of interest to the community and the committee to bring to the council to consider. So I don't know if that was a basis to adopt the moratorium at this time.
Mm-hmm. What I'm thinking is that there's not many properties in question here, so if one project is approved beforehand that doesn't conform to the new zoning, because it wouldn't exist by then, we're kind of saying to the committee, we want to hear your recommendations, but we're going to continue to approve things regardless of your recommendations between now and then. And we may get something that doesn't fit with that new zoning, and which I don't think is an outcome that we want. I didn't really hear anything, Nick, from you that said that definitively we cannot do a moratorium. It sounds like there's a hard stop. We know what the completion date would be. We have a valid public purpose. I didn't really hear anything that said no. Am I misunderstanding you?
No, it's within your discretion. What I'm saying is that I've not actually heard what those purposes would be, and it seems contradictory when you've established a committee to sort of develop what it is to be studied and what's going to be studied over the next several months. It seems premature to have a moratorium because I actually didn't think that public purpose was fully spelled out. But Dan, to address your first comment about projects, if a project comes before the board and that project is proposing something that you think is inconsistent, you can then propose a moratorium at that time, right? The moratorium can be adopted in sufficient time. It requires a local law to be introduced, referred to the planning board, and then a public hearing. So if that were to come up, you would have sufficient time before it got through the secret process and through the land use planning board process.
Yeah, I actually think we have 2 layers of protection. That's sort of one of them. I think the first one is we have a really good planning board. And if there is an application, and which we don't know will occur, that's their job. It's not our job. And they're going to look at the zoning. Okay, we've talked about a few changes, not a great deal. We've talked about design standards. We actually proposed where we might grab some design standards from. Seems to me the planning board has a fair bit of discretion, especially around site plan and design issues, that would give them that. The only considerations that might they not have any discretion over, that would allow the second layer of protection, which is, okay, then at that time, if we see an application that we really have some significant issues with because it would contradict where we think we might be heading, we could do something at that time. So I think to do something ahead of this, especially when we don't even have a proposal on the table from anybody, is really premature.
And I want to just say on the bike lane thing, like we keep throwing out, oh, we're going to just do these bike lanes and they're easy. And it's like no one's even asked for what the width of the road is and whether or not it can be accommodated. So I think one of the benefits of having this committee is fact-checking some of this stuff, because we redesigned all of Fishkill Avenue, and we had that project go on for 20 years because they had to get right-of-way just for sidewalks. There's a lot of things that we don't know at this table right now that need to be vetted out before we go, say, oh, we're going to go do this. Well, does it actually fit? Is it safe? Is there a traffic study that suggests it? Does it make sense? Is it economical? So, and that's just one part of it. I would just say, too, I spent over 8 years as Deputy Director of Planning of Ulster County, and what we used to tell communities is if you're using a moratorium, you basically have, your planning process has failed. The planning process is supposed to be an iterative, ongoing thing that you continue to build on and improve. You didn't stop building on Main Street when you did the Main Street access, and yet we're still taking that report and implementing it bit by bit. I would, as a planner, I would just say, we used to heavily recommend against moratoriums. That is not best practice, it is not good policy. Unless if the dam collapses and we don't have water, absolutely. But if you don't have some emergency on the horizon, you're using a tool that's way more of a tool than you need here right now.
In lieu of the moratorium, is there an opportunity to do sort of interim tweaking of the current zoning that would define clearer design standards that would prohibit some of the stuff that we fear might happen under the current zoning?
I might suggest, I think it would be sort of jump-starting the process to put in architectural standards or those sorts of things that were previously suggested. But there is one thing you could do up front that I don't think people would have a major problem with. And there's a mechanism to do it right now that the city has a draft parking standards revision on the table. And one thing you could do is put some provisions in for the general business district for parking standards that would prohibit front yard parking or for new construction, or, landscaping standards in connection with the parking lots, so that people wouldn't be able to do sort of auto-oriented stuff, that it would at least have to have the parking behind the building. And so you could put that into the parking standards that you're already consider, and that way you wouldn't, you would protect against the worst site plans happening, but you wouldn't be short-circuiting the work of the committee.
Yeah, I'm not too worried about that. I think the most likely things we're going to see is someone trying to use an existing structure that is being vacated, right? I think we're a long ways away from someone proposing, I'm going to tear down, one of the Healy buildings and I'm going to build something else. Again, especially in this interest rate environment, we're losing already approved projects. And you can start to see them even on Main Street, where we've got a building that's been torn down except for a safe and nothing's going on. So I don't think we have any significant risk of seeing some runaway project that's going to tear something down and build something contrary to where we think we're heading.
Lee, I wanted to clarify something that you said that maybe I misunderstood, which was that we've discussed certain potential changes and that the planning board would be able to use their judgment on site plans based off of our conversations as opposed to off of existing code?
So, and help me out, John or Nick, if I get this wrong, but the zoning in that area specifies, things like height, uses of some, but generally speaking, the site plan, that's why we're looking for design standards. It tends to be open. So what I'm saying is I think to the extent that it's open, they have a fair amount of discretion. Help me out if I'm off on that, gentlemen.
Well, there's no specific section of the code that deals with the general business district in terms of any sorts of standards other than the bulk standards in the tables. Now, you do have general site plan standards that talk about, buildings being compatible, and, there's very generalized sorts of standards in the site plan section. And the planning board generally tends, if there's not standards, that gives them a lot of discretion because they're not violating any standards. But having standards gives the planning board more ammunition, and it allows the applicants to come in with something that's probably more right than wrong in the first pass. So it's a good thing to have standards, but the planning board does have a certain amount of architectural and site plan standards based on the general standards in the site plan section. And they have used that effectively in the past. That the applicants who come to Beacon often use the same engineers and the same architects, and they know what the planning board likes, and they try to make it easier for their client to get through the process. So we haven't seen many atrocities come in before the planning board that really deserve 180-degree pushback. But there's nothing preventing somebody to put in a fast food restaurant with a drive-through lane right now, and the planning board would not be able to push back on that because it's not disallowed in the code.
Other comments?
Sorry, and then was I also understanding the mechanism for if we do see, as a council, if we do see a proposal coming in through the planning board that we think is completely out of line, we're allowed to weigh in on that in the form of a moratorium?
Correct. If there was a proposal made that you thought was at odds with were the revisions that were being fleshed out and hopefully further advanced than they are today, you would have that ability to then adopt the moratorium to sort of stop that rush to the gates that John spoke about, because you saw a project that is proceeding that really goes to the heart of what you're hoping to study.
Nick, that seems to, so I thought city council members can't talk about planning board projects. And second of all, are we allowed to propose a moratorium as a direct response to an application?
Yes. So the answer is you're not supposed to go and talk about specific applications, but if you're seeing something that is proposed and you say, well, wait a moment, I didn't realize our zoning code allowed something that could be in this way and that's not a use or something I proposed, you could then come in and adopt a moratorium. Yes, if you're doing, again, if you're doing it for impermissible reasons, such as a protected class, a race, religion, a church, that obviously you can't do. But if something is being proposed that is at odds with your vision, and now you're saying, a new, use coming in is inconsistent, you could adopt a moratorium at that time.
But isn't our vision illustrated by the current zoning?
It is, and that's why I'm saying that there's nothing that's not yet advanced that I think supports a moratorium, but in the next month or two, as you flesh this committee out, maybe that changes.
Yeah, I guess that's my question, Nick. It would have to be not something that doesn't reflect our vision as it is articulated in the current zoning, but we would have grounds if it is counter to what we have been discussing changing the zoning to?
Correct.
And that's less likely to inspire litigation than doing a moratorium prior to any plans being
Actually,
presented?
George, I would argue it actually supports a moratorium of that place because you have a concrete example of something that is being proposed that would be at odds with what you're hoping to accomplish.
So
Right now,
I think it meets the imminent criteria that John was mentioning, maybe, Nick?
correct. Right now, I think you're lacking both. You're lacking sort of a cohesive vision for what you're hoping to accomplish, as well as some threat or imminence to that being advanced before the planning board.
All this discussion is a good indication of why it would be more effective if this committee had a short time frame and met more often, rather than met once a month and dragged it out over a year or more. Try to make the committee understand that this is a fluid situation and that it benefits the city to have this get to the zoning stage earlier rather than later. And if indeed you can keep the plan down to a 6-month time frame and the zoning to a 3-month time frame, then you're in good shape for making sure that bad projects don't sneak in the back door.
Okay. All right, so I will, in terms of next steps, make some edits to the document. I will, we've just had our chair and our planner listen in on our desire to get it done pretty quickly. That might be a good thing, because it limits how much time you have to volunteer. And I think it'll be in all our interest not to drag it out. And we'll go from there unless there's other comments.
I just wanted to add my thanks to JC for stepping up to volunteer to do this. This will be a lot of your time for quite a few months, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, JC.
Okay. John, we still got you, right? So, and Nick, so the next one is proposed local law concerning internal lot subdivisions. Who starts this up? Is it Nick or John?
Mayor, I will, and John will certainly supplement and join me in the conversation. Let me start with an overview. The council introduced the local law, held a public hearing at its meeting last week. That was continued to your December 11th meeting. You received a comment from the county planning board that it was a matter of local concern. You received some public comments, and you also received the planning board's report in its letter of November 17th that had 3 comments. And you have included in your packet a memo from our office that addresses the first comment, that the city council should review the legislative history of chapter 223-25C to understand why it is currently limited to commercial properties. And so that legislative history consisted of the minutes when this local law was considered in 2003, of the minutes to the planning board meetings, as well as the city council meeting and public hearings. Let me step back. The section 225-C talks about site development plan approval and what that involves. And so the local law was amended in 2003 to expand the site plan process. Typically, site plan is one step. You come in and you obtain your site plan, and again, a site plan review is looking at the layout of the building and how it works both internally and externally. Landscaping, drainage, the location of the building on the property, access for parking, traffic, garbage trucks, fire trucks, things of that nature. So in 2003, the law was amended to allow for 2-phase site plan approval. The first phase being a concept plan and the second being the actual site plan. And when you read the minutes, and the focus of the minutes and the discussions were all on parts 1 and 2 of the section 223-25C, not the third part that we're talking about. And they talk about why there should be a 2-step site plan approval process, and that's because of the larger projects. You want to make sure that before you spend the money as a developer on the more detailed aspects of stormwater drainage, landscaping, things of that nature, that you first get concept plan approval, similar to what we do in the Fishkill Creek development. You get concept plan approval. So the village city code was amended to allow for a 2-phase site plan approval process. The document's legislative history doesn't set forth any specific reason that we identify that explains why that subsection 3, which allows for internal lot subdivisions, were initially excluded from residential and mixed-use projects, and in fact why this whole concept was initially limited just to non-residential. Quite frankly, it appears that the question of allowing internal lot subdivisions for residential mixed-use property was merely absent from the discussion, not that there was a specific intent to include such. It doesn't come out in the legislative history. So it's our opinion that legislative history, while good to look at, doesn't inform the discussion before the council. Any questions on that first point? The second question.
Sorry,
yes.
Nick, I'll just add that in my reading of the notes, which as you said, you just have what's in front of us, it seemed to be why I interpreted, yes, they didn't talk about residential and decide not to do it, but the focus was particularly on trying to encourage economic development. Fascinating read for those in the public who haven't read this part, but that was when, DIA had just opened, there were other things going on in Beacon, and so I think there was this big push to how can we get the economic development that we want, and so what I interpreted from that was why the push was more about those site plans that were about bringing in commercial businesses rather than residential at the time. That was more the focus of the council in particular. Sorry, but you can take it from there.
Yep, no, thank you for reinforcing that. I agree. It was interesting reading. The second comment was the City Council should consider whether language should be added to provide standards by which the planning board should review the application, including that the application will be reviewed in accordance with the requirements of the code in effect at the time of the application. So the code currently provides that no development within any lot will be permitted except as shown on the site plan approved by the planning board, and also that the standards referred to in section 223-17D, which is the schedule of use regulations setting forth the uses and the dimensional regulations, applies to the overall site area. So it's our opinion that the language is already contained within this code that sets forth the standards and also the requirements that the planning board recommended. John, you were a part of this conversation between the planning board. Do you have anything else to add?
I think there was just a couple members of the planning board who haven't had experience doing this before, and frankly just didn't seem to understand the purpose and so they said, can you be more explicit? And I think the section 3 talks about provisions satisfactory to the planning board for maintenance of all the elements of the site plan should also be a prerequisite for any subdivision of the overall site plan. So it allows the planning board to set down specific standards and provisions. And generally speaking, things that we do on a lot of large site plans, there's easements involved, access for, adjacent properties and whatever else. I think the two things that you have to agree that are in place in order to make these internal subdivisions defendable and capable of being approved is one, there's a provision in the law that allows it. This gives more flexibility to the planning board because it gives it for residential and mixed-use projects, just not commercial, which I think is a good thing that these are available for larger projects of all types. That the planning board has sufficient legal and engineering expertise to lay down easements and conditions on the adoption of the internal subdivision. Everything I've seen from the planning board process is they have excellent legal advice and engineering advice so that all the I's and T's are crossed in terms of easements that are necessary and conditions in the resolutions that lay out the reasons and the provisions that cover all the bases. And that the second thing is that you have to have sort of a long-term ability to withhold records so that if 5 years down the line that property comes up again and you have a question about what was approved before, there's a paper trail that is clear and make sure that the planning board at that time knows what all the things that they have to consider if they're considering a change to that property. So I have full confidence that the people who advise the planning board are on top of this, and I've seen it in action on Building 16 for the Groveville site. It went smoothly in the planning board process. Over 2 meetings, they hashed out all the easement requirements and conditions, and I don't see a problem with this.
And I would say, John, that when this gets reviewed, one of the comments we would have to the planning board is a condition be imposed on the subdivision that a note be added to the subdivision map, noting that this subdivision was an internal lot subdivision pursuant to 225C3, and that all future use of the property is subject to compliance with the schedule of use regulations. So that way it's clear. And I think that's also a comment made by a member of the public was also similar to the planning board, is would a future use, once it's subdivided, would they be able to come in with a new project, and what conditions would they have to apply? What standards would they have to apply to? And the law makes clear that for an internal lot subdivision, that any new uses or future uses continue to need to have to comply with the zoning ordinance as though it was an unsubdivided lot. They would need to comply with the zoning then in effect.
The planning board has been very good about putting notes on the plan that memorialize these sorts of things, rather than just having them in the minutes or, in some side agreement. They are very good. They get good legal advice to make sure that the site plan itself has references to easements and provisions in the code that justify certain aspects. So, I'm not sure that anything more than what's on there that's being proposed now is required.
I have a question about special use permits. So if a property that's going to subdivide, and this may already be applicable with the commercial, but I'm just curious. So if the overall project got a special use permit from City Council, and the special use permit is for the overall project, but now it's being subdivided, what happens to the special use permit after the subdivision?
The special use permit still remains in effect. It runs with the land. The project isn't changing. It's just that the property is having this internal lot subdivision. So the special use permit and all the conditions that the council imposed would travel with that lot and each of the lots that would be created.
Thanks.
And if they wanted to make a change in the future, or 5 years down the line or whatever, they would have to go back through the same process to have it amended.
So the third comment then was the city council should examine implications for current and future projects. And I think that's been embedded in the discussion is, how does this work, and how's this, not so much for current projects, but I guess in the future, how is this going to impact any future developments or projects that come into the city? And we've answered to that question that it really doesn't impact them one way or the other than allowing the internal lot subdivision for financing purposes. All the zoning regulations remain in effect. The special use permit, as Dan indicated, the site plan, any conditions would apply to all of the lots, so that it still remains from a planning board and a planning perspective as one cohesive site.
Nick, my understanding is if we allow this, how it works is that with the internal lot subdivision, it enables, like why Edgewater specifically wants this, is so they can then get separate financing or separate out how they finance. Is that accurate?
That is correct, yes. Because right now, you'd have to get financing on all, whatever it is, 9 buildings. If it's going to be done in phases and construction, and different lenders, they would want to be able to get a mortgage secured just against that without having to have a mortgage on the entire property.
Thank you. Is it therefore possible with any future project, maybe not Edgewater, but a future one, that you could have one bank is, different banks are supporting different parts of the project, and then you end up defaulting on a loan, and a bank ends up taking over one part of the project? And then could the bank then sell on that defaulted property inside an internal subdivision to a different owner? So you could have 2 different owners within the same site plan?
Yes, that is theoretically possible. The subsequent owner would be bound by the conditions of the special use permit and the site plan approval and the easements and restrictions, so it wouldn't have an impact on the remaining development. Because any cross easements for drainage, landscaping, greenway trails, parking, etc., would all be easements that have been previously recorded.
Okay.
So, Mayor and council members, the hearing is open for your meeting on the 11th. You have the environmental assessment form, and you now have the planning board report. So this would be, if you're in favor to do so, you could close the public hearing at your meeting on the 11th and consider it for a vote on the 11th.
Sorry, one other thing, and this might have been in the memo that was shared in previous ones, so forgive me if I didn't. Is there an urgency around this in terms of Edgewater's inability in particular to not do something they're trying to do right now? I'm trying to figure out if there's something that there's, just the timeline that's being asked of us and some more details behind that.
Not that I've heard. No, I think if you get it done on the meeting of the 11th or the 18th, I'm sure that's fine, just so that it gets done with this council. But John, I'm not sure if you're aware of any urgency.
Yeah, the initial meeting we had with Edgewater representatives, I guess there's 5 buildings approved. They've completed 3 of them, I think, and they're looking to move from construction loan to long-term financing, which is a lower interest rate. So they want to be able to subdivide those 3 buildings out, get their long-term financing for those 3 buildings at a lower interest rate, and then get the construction loan for the final 2 buildings in the second phase. I think that's what's generally being proposed, and because of the high interest rates right now, they're under some financial pressure to be able to be flexible enough to get the right rate for the right buildings at the right time, because otherwise, it could throw a real problem to them. So I think the sooner the better. They didn't give us any, we have to have this done by X date, but I know that the first 3 buildings are coming closer to completion, and I think that's what they're looking towards.
And just a reminder, we only have 2 meetings left after this before the new council is seated.
I do think, as a general matter, if we can get legislation that's being introduced before one council, voted on by that council, it's best to do so. But that would be either at your meeting on the 11th or the 18th, if you were so inclined.
Okay. Everybody all right?
This may be overly speculative, but my understanding is that while this was triggered by a single applicant, that what I've sort of understood is that this policy might help with unsticking some other stalled out projects across the city. Is that a correct understanding?
Right. Yeah, it might.
I can't speak to that, though.
Yeah, it might if there's a project that you could split up like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a small one would probably be a no, but for instance, maybe, one on the creek that's fairly large, that might work. It could be for, if we ever got some spare land in the correctional facility area, it would have to be larger projects, right? So, where it makes sense for them to try to, split it up. I'm not surprised that there's pressure right now because of interest rates, right? So.
Just one last question. The affordable housing requirement of 10% for a project would remain for the entire project and not for the individual subdivided buildings? If that's consistent with what other things you've said, is that right?
That is correct, yes. That requirement doesn't go away.
Thanks.
Okay. Anything else on this one? All right. I note for those who were reading minutes back from 2003 that there's some interesting side issues there occurring.
Oh, so many interesting side issues.
So for those of you who want the history, that was the first year I decided to take on the police department on overtime. And so you saw in the minutes my getting hammered every meeting by the same person. And you saw us sort of just saying, why are we giving more money? And we just keep giving more money to the police department. And you could see in those minutes, we were starting to coalesce on being consistent as a council on the issue. Yeah, that's what those minutes are about. So there's a very long story that goes with it. But yeah, you saw some interesting elements of it. So, okay. Going on to the fourth one, the 24 budget. So Chris, you want to kind of give us an update and see where we can get to on that?
Yes.
Thank you.
So since we met last, the county has finalized its assessment roles. So you'll see the budget in your package. the cover page that has the rates no longer says proposed budget, it says tentative budget. And basically, the change was minor enough that people's taxes will go down an average of about 96 cents. So I did want to let you know, like last year, we passed the budget before we had that final. This year we have it, so we put it in there. Justice had pointed out a mistake in the recreation budget. Justice, we're going to vet that tomorrow with Sue, and if it was a mistake, which I believe it was, we will change it. We have a continued public hearing next week on the 11th for this. The only issue that's come up was one about city council compensation, and I believe, Nick, did you send an email around to council? So,
Thank you, Chris. I did late this evening, just before the meeting, so I don't know if council members have had a chance to look at it. There were questions about the process to increase the council member compensation. So if the council votes this year, excuse me, adopts a local law this year, then to increase the compensation and change the language in the charter, that would not require or be subject to a permissive referendum. If, however, that is done during the term, which starts on January 1st of the next 2 years. So if you vote during your term to increase your compensation, that is subject to a permissive referendum. So there would be time to schedule a public hearing for the meeting of the 18th to consider a local law to amend the charter to modify the language in the charter for compensation for the council members.
But you'd have to let us know tonight so we can get the notice lined up.
Correct. We need to know that tonight.
And we could, if we did that, because I saw later on in the email you talked about the idea of different rates, but if we just wanted to do, I think, one of Justice's proposals, which was to increase to, I think it was cost of living, we could just do that part, but leave the idea of, do we want to differentiate for a discussion for future councils? Am I understanding? We could just do one of those things.
Mm-hmm. You could do one if you were to change the compensation. I think, from what I've seen in other council charters, is that cost of living increases is not the typical for a variety of reasons, and a flat rate would be better. You could also do it that it could be at a rate to be set by the council members in the budget. But a CPI index or something of that nature, I think, is a little unusual and results in some differing math over the years.
And then
So
also expect your unions to ask for the same thing. They're going to carefully watch what's done here.
Yeah, I would think the better approach would be to do catch-up. In other words, to say it hasn't been done since then, since a period, and then pick a flat amount, right? But the moment you tie it to something, then, yeah, I think that's a bargaining.
Yeah, I think you framed it as cost of living, which is why I said that. I wasn't proposing that as the thing. It was more how we got to the, I think it was 11,000 number.
Yeah, because it hasn't been raised in about 10 years or over 10 years.
And that amount today, in today's dollars, would be 11,000.
Okay.
So
and
just to match
I think
that.
for the mayors, it was 29. I don't remember. It's been a while since we talked about it.
So if we wanted that to be reflected in the budget next year, what I'm hearing is we would have to choose to have a public hearing. Tonight, we would have to choose to have a public hearing.
Yeah, you would set the public hearing at next week's meeting, but it gives us time to line up the notice. Like, well, if we have a consensus on or a majority of the council that want to do it, then we can put the notice in early. I think, Nick, is it 15 days notice?
It's 5 days for non-zoning local laws. Zoning laws are 10 days for those looking for extra credit, but it's 5 days.
Okay, then we have time.
So, sorry, we would be setting a public hearing for the 11th?
No, for the 18th.
No, the meeting of the 18th. On December 11th, you would set a public hearing for December 18th to consider changing the charter to allow for an increase in the compensation for the position of the council members and the mayor, and we would just need tonight to have a consensus that you wish to schedule that hearing? And then what is that new compensation? And we'll then draft the local law, have it in your packet for the next week's meeting.
Well, I would like to move forward with that. Yeah, and I think it's great that there's a public hearing because we'll hear what the public has to say. But I would like to move forward with that if the rest of the council would indulge me.
We have specific increases, Justice?
What Chris had said before, from 9,000 to 11,000 for council.
And then the mayor's would go up some amount too, but that number is roughly 29,000?
From 25 to 29.
Okay. What are other views?
I'm certainly curious to at least, put it on the public, for the public to give feedback on. I'm very curious to know. I'm also, as we're talking about budget, if, what this does, how this would impact our 2024 budget, that's just an element as we're talking about that right now. If you have any insight, I don't know if, Chris, if you have anything, or if that's something you can share at our next meeting if we did go through with this. But I would support putting this to a public hearing.
Okay, others? We good?
Yeah, sure. Let's hear from the public. I think, I do think that the stipend for city council is disproportionate to the amount of work, but I'm very wary of using this position to give myself an increase. So if push comes to, if it comes to the point where I would be voting on giving myself an increase, I'm going to vote no. So we have the time frame will be not the next council, but the council after, or?
No, the law that you're considering, if introduced and voted on on December 18th, unless you indicate, the council indicates otherwise, would take effect in 2024.
All right, let's hear from the public, yeah.
And I would just say financially, you have to do one of three things. You're going to raise taxes to make up for that money, you're going to add it to the fund balance that we utilize, or you cut it from something else. So you have those three options.
All right, so anyone object to going to setting a public hearing and seeing
I still don't have a sense, Mayor, what the proposal is financially. So I'm going to be asked by Susan tomorrow what the financial, is it the council? Is it 2,000 apiece?
So
how much is the mayor's piece?
Let's see what I heard. I think I heard 6 council members times +2, and then 1 mayor +4. Unless you,
or it should be 4,500. So if you're giving the same rate,
okay,
it would be 29,500.
All right, so whatever the equivalent would be, right? So I think that sounds like 12, 16.5.
16.5.
All right. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so does that give you enough guidance?
Yes.
Good. Then we would say okay to go with a public hearing on that item, which we would set a date for it on the 11th for the 18th. Is that all right?
Mm-hmm.
And what we've heard, though, is that we may not all be supportive of it, right? And that's okay. Still collect the information.
Question for Nick. At this point, does that require a resolution to amend the proposed budget, Nick?
I don't think so, Chris, because the law is not being adopted yet. So I don't think you can't specifically appropriate something that's not permitted. So it would require, A, that the law be considered for a vote before you vote on the budget, and you then have a vote to amend the budget to include that, and then you would vote on the budget.
Oh, so that doesn't sound like it works with our timeline, does it?
Yeah, you would have to do it all on the 18th.
Yeah, you do it on the 18th.
Everything on the 18th. Okay,
Yeah.
so that would happen before we voted on the budget.
The law would precede the budget,
Yes.
and then there would be an amendment to amend the proposed budget.
Okay.
Yes,
Nick,
thank you.
is there any way to opt as a sitting council member to not accept the increase for yourself?
No, that often comes up whether it's any municipal official, a judge or board member wishes to either have their salary donated or not accept it, no, it needs to be paid.
Okay.
I mean, I know we're not talking about this yet, but I feel like I want to have this discussion. I think Justice raised this in their last time on council, and this could be something we decide to kick down the road for 2 years after. So, but I feel like it's that we can bring it up and see what the public says. I appreciate it creates some challenges in terms of doing everything at our last meeting, but it feels like it's worth it so we can discuss what the options are. So.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to the discussion, and I definitely agree with the principle of keeping compensation up at a reasonable rate, with the purpose of this position becoming more accessible to more people that maybe have less income. I'm just trying to figure out how to stomach it personally, but that's neither here nor there in terms of hearing what the public has to say.
And one last comment, Chris, is that the council could adopt the budget on the 11th, and then it would just be that any increase would not come out of the taxed portion of the 2024 budget, and you'd have to find it through budget amendments or take it out of your general fund. By voting on it on the night of the budget, you would then be adding it to your budget amount to be assessed.
Oh, that's right. We were going to try to adopt the budget next week.
Right, so you still could, it's just a matter of...
Which I would like to do because we have 3 MOAs that follow the budget that I need to do on the 18th. So we have the $1,000 retention initiative. We can just add it to fund balance. I mean, that's the cleanest anyway. And then we can see if the local law is adopted on the 18th and then amend the budget.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that would mean that the extra 16,500 or whatever the amount was is not coming out of your 2024 budget. It's coming out of your appropriations correctly, but it's not increasing the amount appropriated.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And just for history, I've voted both ways on these in the past. I voted no for some time, and then after a while I did vote yes on an increase. Yeah, it's a hard issue, right? Because, it's hard. So.
Well, you don't run for office to enrich yourself.
Yeah,
and then you realize how much work it is.
Just so you know, the first time I voted no, the salary was $3,000, and we were trying to raise it from that. But again, it's not a straightforward issue, and I respect all your viewpoints on this, and, it's not obvious, so.
Can I suggest a couple other budget things?
Of course.
So the first thing that I wanted to bring up was, I think there was mention early on in the budget discussion of getting more of the radar signs, the speed signs. I don't remember if it was, I think it came from that end of the table, but.
I asked if there was any intention of getting more, and I don't think the police department had.
I was going to ask if we could increase the number of those signs, potentially to include them in school zones. I'm not sure how much they are, but.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to do that, Dan, because we've added some on some of the stretches like Fishkill Avenue where we really are having an issue. I don't want these to proliferate all over. Like everything that we buy, we have to maintain and install and move around. I would just say this police department hasn't asked for them and doesn't really want them right now.
So a couple things. So first of all, I'm not asking to put them all over town. I thought the recommendation before was that they would be at the entrances to town, which we have them at 2, to my knowledge. Maybe we have a third one. And I just wanted to propose school zones, like maybe Liberty or some of the main roads.
You have 4 entrances to town, so you'd have to buy them for Route 9D coming in from the south.
Well, we already have one on 9D.
No, you don't
by the
have.
church.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, do you want them at the entrance or not? Again, you can make a resolution, but like,
I mean,
we're not looking to do that.
Right,
And you have a mechanism, like if there's something next year, we've been able to do budget amendments or move other things. I don't have a price at at this time for those. I don't know what they are, and I know that I asked the police, and they said, we think we're fine with what we have.
Okay. Well, just a reminder, the police department didn't request these in the first place, and they're working well. And so city council can make good recommendations, even if we haven't,
Yes.
screened the idea with the chief in the first place. But I do think that these are working well. I heard anecdotally from the folks on Fishkill Avenue that they are like watching the cars slow down and slam on the brakes when they see this thing. And I know that I do it, and other people going to the station in the morning do it when passing the one on 9D. All right, I mean...
You could put money in the budget for it. It's up to you. I don't know that, again, part of it is like, how do you choose where to put them versus where not to put them? We have that same issue with...
suggested school zones.
Okay, school zones, but that's a lot of areas. I mean...
Let me suggest something to have just some other views on the table. I think we got 3 now, is that right?
I don't know. It would have been good to ask this before the meeting, so I could have talked to the chief and ascertain. I don't know how many we have, 3 or 4.
So then, let me just suggest the following. So I thought we would at least know that. I would be interested in hearing from the police department on their usage and whether this would be helpful. If it would, and we reach a consensus on that, I'm okay if we deal with that next year and not put it in this budget. If we want to put it in this budget, my 2 cents would have been I would have preferred to hear that from the chief at the presentation. But there's other views that are welcome on the table.
Or at least have the discussion when he was online. Like, we didn't really have that discussion. So, like,
well, I thought somebody had already mentioned it, and I didn't know whether it was being implemented or not. And so that's why I was just raising it again at the end of the process. I thought tell us what we're allowed to talk about. I feel like sometimes I come to city council and you're like, sorry, Dan, it's too late for us to get a quote. It's like, all right, next year I'll bring my ideas earlier.
Let me suggest, let's just take some other views on this. So you've raised it, that's great. Let's all have a discussion rather than a single-handed one. Any thoughts on this one?
I have also heard feedback that they're effective, and I would be interested in knowing more about whether or not there are better spots to include them. I do not necessarily feel the need to weigh in on the exact process, but I am interested in the idea.
Mm-hmm. Any other views?
Well, I don't think it should be based on anecdotal reviews of the impact. I'd like to hear from the police department.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it proves effective for me is it appears, and then you alter your behavior. The fact that they're portable, I think, is reflecting that you don't need one permanently at every single location. You might want to try it out as much as you might want a rotation to get there. So, for instance, at a school, obviously that's relevant during a school year, but it's not at all times. So, if they have a calendar of moving stuff around and they have target locations, we might want to suggest some locations, but my guess would be that they could manage that with what they have, unless they tell us otherwise, which is why I'm with George, that I just like to hear what they have to say.
I will say I'm curious to hear what the police have to say, but also they are not the only arbiters of sort of what's good practice. I would also be curious to hear from the Traffic Safety Committee, and I know that in the past Justice has presented us with studies and data about these types of machines, so I just want to voice that as well.
Yeah, and if there hasn't been, if these signs are up, the police are unlikely to be using radar to test whether people are slowing down, but let's see what they have to say. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to raise was because I don't know, I know this year we had in the budget the money for the traffic study for lowering our speed limit. I know that it's one of the ones that's kind of coming up to the end of the year, Chris, as far as whether or not we can get it done. But in the event that it can't get done in the next 4 weeks, I just want to make sure that we are okay to do this next year because it's something that City Council clearly stated that we want to do. And I think I missed the conversation when that was on, I think I missed that workshop conversation.
If I'm not mistaken, a traffic study was done and presented at the Traffic Safety and Advisory Committee.
No.
No? Okay, I am
Not
mistaken.
for the speed limit.
Not for the speed limit, okay.
Yeah, it was a different one, the county.
This was to
County,
monitor the
county.
impact on different intersections and traffic lights by the slower speeds.
So two things. You have planning studies in for $30,000, which should cover it.
Right.
Secondly, NICOM is working with the state to try to remove the mandate for a study. Because municipalities are saying, this is really onerous. Why would we have to do this? And it was ill-defined in the law. It was kind of stuck in at the last minute, like, well, you can do this, but then you have to do an engineering study, and nobody really defined that well. So the DOT really doesn't even know what to recommend. And that's one of the reasons I'm kind of holding fire, because I don't want to do a big study and then they come back and say, well, that's not what you were supposed to study. So I'm hopeful, I think we can get it done next year, and I'm hopeful that we don't have to do it next year if there's a change, an update in the law. And I think now that NICOM has taken it on, which is the, represents villages and cities all over the state, that now has some legs, hopefully.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Other comments, suggestions, questions?
To bring up my earlier question about potential financial support for the Fishkill Avenue Ad Hoc Committee, Chris, I'm curious if you have any thoughts about if they did have and I don't want to presume they do have a financial need. I rely on JC and whoever is on the committee to determine that, but if you have any thoughts on what we should be budgeting now, how we should be thinking about that if we wanted to make sure the committee had what they needed to do a good job.
I don't, but it's the mayor's committee, and he can come back and tell us to find money for whatever's needed there.
Yeah, I mean,
You're going to have the planner's time, which is already partially in the budget, and we'll see.
Yeah, my thinking on it was the, we have a piece in there for the planner, and so I thought that would be the bulk, which would be that professional support. We have, an engineer. Is it a retainer or is it an hourly, Chris?
It's hourly.
But, we have budget again for that. We don't know exactly how it will get used. Like, for instance, last year, the city engineer, laid out a conceptual plan for the access road from 52 to, as long as it's not a lot of hours. So what I would suggest, because my head was, in my head I was thinking it's not going to be a ton. What I would suggest is let's wait. I think we'll be certainly amenable to supporting it to whatever extent is needed, so that if it's not in places that we have existing budget items for, I think we can do a one-off to council for an amendment. That would be my 2 cents, because it's a little early to tell exactly what it would be. I can't give you a number, except the ones that I think we've already got budget for, meaning the planner or the engineer, so.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, anything else on this one? And we still have some time, so, because we have to adopt it, there might be another one that comes up. Okay.
So just to clarify, our intent is to close the public hearing on the 11th and vote for the budget?
That would be my hope, because then on the 18th, I have the 3 MOAs with the unions. And we'd like to get those in place so that we don't have to redo payroll twice.
Right, you need those approved so that you can pay them out before year end?
No, they don't get paid out before. It goes into their base salary.
I'm sorry.
So like, absent our action on the MOA, they would just get whatever contractual increases. This would add the $1,000 retention bonus on that.
Right,
A bonus isn't the right word. It's a raise.
But you
COLA.
want the 1/52nd of it into the first paycheck, right?
Yeah,
that's
because
what it is.
we have to update all the rates once anyway on January 1st.
Yep.
So if we don't pass this until the 8th, then we're redoing everybody again.
Got it. Okay.
And Sarah is working with the unions on that.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, are we okay to move to performance and maintenance bonds? Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Nick, you were going to take us through that?
I am, Mayor. Thank you. So in connection with certain land use approvals, when there are public improvements, such as sidewalks or stormwater pipes put in, your code requires, and the planning board conditions of approval require, that the applicant provide a performance and maintenance bond. A performance bond is a financial guarantee that if the applicant, the developer, fails to put in and install the stormwater pipe, the sewer pipe, the water pipe, the sidewalk, or the improvements such as a traffic light or traffic sign, any public improvement, that the bonding company will then provide the funds necessary to complete the installation. The maintenance bond is required after you install the sidewalk or the landscaping or the bond or the pipes to make sure that it then functions appropriately, typically for 1 or 2 years, depending upon the infrastructure and depending upon the conditions. Those by the city code and law are required to come to the city council for approval. We see that these are routine. The amounts are set by the city engineer, who looks at what he anticipates the cost to be. Typically, the developer will provide an estimate along with a line item, and then the city engineer reviews that and also does their own independent review, and then it makes an advice and recommendation to the city as to what would be the appropriate amount in that bond. So we're suggesting that these should be streamlined for review and be approved by the city administrator, assuming it has been accepted and approved by the city engineer and the city attorney. We look at it to make sure that from a legal standpoint, the bonding company has complied with all legal requirements, and those funds are set forth in a manner that they can be accessed by the city. It should be, and we've had this experience in other municipalities, as simple as saying, here's the condition, they were put on notice, they've defaulted, provide the money, and generally it does work that way when the bond is written correctly. You may recall you had done this with respect to certain easements and stormwater management maintenance agreements. You adopted a resolution authorizing the city administrator to sign those. So that's the purpose of this proposed resolution. And you have a draft of a resolution in your agenda packet. Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add, as you're the one who typically reviews and receives these.
No, this is your thing.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you. No, I want to make sure I covered everything. So, Mayor, that's the explanation.
Okay. Any questions on this?
Yeah, I can't recall one of these ever coming to us, so I'm curious what is the involvement that might come to city council? Is there a set amount that then we run out, we have to renew? I'm not quite following the current process and what the role of city council is and how often that comes up.
Mm-hmm. So it will come up when there are projects that require it. I can't tell you the exact dollar amount. I think it's whenever there's a bond in place. I don't know that this is always being processed in that way, and that is one of the items we're cleaning up, just to make sure it does get approved.
Oh, so it's just that we haven't maybe had a project that's
Correct.
needed one of these in the time I've been on council.
Correct.
Okay. It looks like, just boilerplate, not boilerplate, but pretty straightforward. I got no issues here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the efficiency, and I would look to our attorney and engineer to make the appropriate recommendation. So if they can do that without needing my sign off, I see no issue with that.
All right, especially since I know nothing about
Yeah,
it.
I have to say, I'd be like, what do you think it should be?
I
Great.
don't know.
So-
Fair enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. And then last one's amendments to the budget. Chris, you got a couple?
We have 4 amendments. The first is to the water fund budget. It is to move $79,000 to repair of equipment from the contingency fund, the contingency retirement fund, and fund balance. This is related to the failure of our pump at Well 2. We think it might have gotten hit by lightning, and they had to pull the whole pump and put a whole new system in. It was an emergency repair because we rely on Well 2, which is in the town of Fishkill, to meet our safe drinking water yields. So you would use up the contingency fund in water, which is fine because it's December, use up the retirement, which we're not looking to use, and then rely on $44,000 in fund balance. Number 2 is a change to the general fund covering police accrual payouts. So we've had 2 retirements in the last 6 months and 1 resignation. This would just move $87,293 from the contingency retirement to severance and retirement pay. The third is in the sewer fund, and it builds upon what we talked about when our chief operator came the other day and talked about the chemicals that we're using. So last year we budgeted $169,000 for the 3 primary chemicals that we use, a polymer, an oxidizer, and a disinfectant. They are trying to bring those down. We had increased the budget to $190. This year we kind of looked at what we've already spent and what we're going to spend in December, and we came up with about $55,000 in additional chemical costs. And again, we're going to use up the contingency fund, part of the contingency the retirement, and $35,000 in fund balance. And then the last one is to the recreation budget, and it's simply a pass-through of state monies for direct care workers that we were able to apply for and then convey to the workers. So that's in the amount of $13,618. And if you have any questions, I can go back through these.
With the police officers, were any of those ones we hadn't been told about before? I feel like we've been kind of kept up to date about changes in police department members.
So you had 2 retirements that I believe you were aware of, Sergeant Dewey and Officer Ingram, who was our K-9 officer. The one that left was Officer Anzavino, who was only with us for about a year.
Okay.
I don't know if I informed you they left, but I think you knew we had an opening.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I will tell you, we are about to lose another officer to another higher paying department, which will probably happen in the next 2 weeks. So it's a competitive field right now.
When is the next test done that we'll have the next batch of?
Well, you have
people?
an executive session to meet 2 new police officers that we're trying to hire before the next list comes out.
Right, because then
So,
turns
we are at
over.
the end of the list, and the county is saying, come on, hurry up, Beacon, so we can put the new list out.
And I'm glad to see the next, I know it's a pass-through, but that next round of child care workers bonus comes through. That's
Yeah.
appreciated for our workers who work with children in the city.
It's well-deserved.
Okay. Any other questions on the amendments? Okay, so I will look for a motion to go into executive session, I would say for personnel and legal advice, in case Nick has any other topics.
Thank you.
Motion to go into executive session for personnel and legal advice and conduct no public business thereafter.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all, and have a good night, except for us. We're not done yet.
And Nick, hopefully he'll come back.